They almost sound ironic. They almost sound like they're imitating the Rolling Stones. So, Luxury, today we're talking about a defining song of the Vietnam era, and it comes from one of the most successful rock bands of all time. I mean, these guys are in their 80s, and they're still on tour. It's insane.
And today we're taking it back to 1966, when these legacy rockers were still in their 20s. But this isn't some optimistic flower power moment. With its bleak lyrics, pounding rhythm, and spell-like riff, this song is one of the darkest songs to ever hit number one. In fact, this is basically a goth, raga, surf rock, Spanish, ballet, Indian, and Middle Eastern song, all wrapped into one.
All in one. That's right, we're talking one song, and that song is Painted Black by the Rolling Stones.
I see a red door and I want it painted black. No colors anymore, I want them.
Hey, One Song listeners, if you love our show, you should check out Trapital, the podcast where technology meets culture.
Each episode, Trapital host and founder Dan Runcie digs into the strategy behind the media and technology that drives our attention. You'll hear Trapital explore topics like YouTube's growing influence in music and entertainment, the never-ending saga about TikTok's future, and how AI is shaping the future.
Media is one of the first industries to get disrupted by new tech. It's Trapital's job to keep you ahead of the latest trends. You can listen to Trapital wherever you get your podcasts. That's Trapital, Trapital. I'm actor, writer, director, and sometimes DJ Diallo Riddle.
And I'm producer, DJ, songwriter, and musicologist Luxury, aka the guy who whispers, interpolation.
And this is One Song,
the show where we break down the stems and stories behind iconic songs across genres and tell you why they deserve one more listen.
You will hear these songs like you've never heard them before. And if you want to watch One Song, you can do so on YouTube. While you're there, please like and subscribe.
So, Diallo, when was the first time you heard Painted Black?
Honestly, my first memory of this song is hearing it as the opening theme to the CBS show Tour of Duty. It was a show about these soldiers in Vietnam, and why at my age I was watching Tour of Duty, I'm not sure.
Okay.
But,
yeah,
it's just like, the TV was on.
Right. The choices were like Donald Duck, whatever.
It was probably, Tour of Duty and Moonlighting. Maybe Moonlighting was a repeat that night.
You were a Moonlighting fan?
I was a huge Moonlighting fan.
What?
Come on, Al Jarreau.
I love that show.
Some fly by night.
Making you wet. Wait, what is the theme song?
Some fly by day.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Moonlighting strangers, because we met on the way.
Great song.
Okay.
We're not here talking about Moonlighting by Al Jarreau. We're here talking about Painted Black by the Rolling Stones. And look, that show was about soldiers in Vietnam. The song was also famously used by Stanley Kubrick in Full Metal Jacket. For me, I've always just used this song as a shorthand for both the Vietnam War and just the baby boomer generation in general. They were having a full-on retro moment in the 80s. I admit, I'm not the biggest Stones fan. I feel like the Stones, I appreciate the Stones the way I appreciate a night of hard drinking. It seems like a great idea at 10:30 p.m.
In theory, more
yeah,
than
no, at 10:30 you're like, oh man, the Stones. But
Can't
then
wait.
Next morning at 8 a.m. you're like, why did I listen to so much Rolling Stones last night?
Interesting. There is something a little heavy about this band. There's a heaviness to
I don't even know if it's heavy. I feel like
musicality, the songwriting, and their story.
No, that's true. I could see that. But I also think that as much as I like them, there's always something, and this is just, I don't know if I can put my finger on it, there's always something that feels a little bit dirty, maybe because some of their material is just so raunchy.
Yeah.
But it's just not the kind of music I could see waking up to and really being about my day.
I wonder, it's so interesting you're saying this because we grew up in an era where the Beatles versus the Stones was just already kind of in the culture, unquestioned, right?
And the Beatles are my hope. They're like me on my best day.
Right.
To a certain extent, they represent hope.
Right.
Whereas the Stones are just man, everything sucks, man.
But there's some truth to that. I'm not dismissing that, but there's also a lot of cultural positioning. We had the Beatles had their haircuts and the suits and the jokiness and the cuteness.
Yeah. You could go to work looking like the Beatles.
Yeah,
You
right.
show up at work looking like Keith Richards.
Paul McCartney and Ringo
You're
Starr.
the first person downsized.
Right. No, but I think that there's some of that is maybe in the music, but some of
Yeah.
it is just like how it was positioned to us growing up, because that was always the rivalry we knew had existed
Right.
decades earlier.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that. I mean, I think Andrew Lou Golden, who's famously the Stones' manager
Yeah.
and ostensibly the producer of this record, but actually I don't think he touched a single knob or dial. But he was an impresario in sort of the true sense of the Brian Epstein, Malcolm McLaren, Colonel Parker school of managers who really
Yeah.
shaped the image of their bands, right? So I think he doubled down on let's be the opposite of the Beatles. I think there was a sense of like, you guys already have this grit and kind of scrappiness to you. Let's double down on that. So there's a little bit of that happening with our Beatles versus Stones. And the Stones are the scrappy, dark ones.
Yeah.
But there's also songs like this that demonstrate that there's a genuine darkness to who they were.
That's a fair point. For you, Luxury, what was the first time you heard this song?
I mean, it certainly would have been my dad's record collection. He would have
Uh-huh.
had all of the Beatles and Stones records. So I would have grown up listening to them side by side, probably before having some awareness of this cultural thing we were just talking
Yeah.
about. So to me, it was just like old music your dad listened to. But obviously, the songs are culturally such a big part of the culture. Like you hear not just Gimme Shelter, but also Sympathy for the Devil and
Yeah.
Satisfaction and Paint It Black and Under My Thumb. These are all
Or Start
songs.
Me Up for
Or Start-
Microsoft 95.
That's- we'll
if
talk
you
about-
start me up.
Oh my God. They were a little bit, to my mind, one of the first groups to just go full on corporate and be like, you know what? We can charge $1,000 for box seats or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's
Do you want the platinum booth?
Right. Let's do a deal with Microsoft. To your point, that's
Yeah.
what made me think of it, for millions of dollars to use our song. And this was counter to like this earlier idea, like the Neil Young not selling out, Bruce
Right.
Springsteen,
Or on our Black
integrity.
Crows episode where he was like, we don't want Budweiser.
Right. Or all of punk rock. There's this sort of idea that like you don't do that if
Right.
you're a true artist or musician. Stones were like, screw it. Mick's like, I went to London School of Economics to like,
You forget
be an
about that. He
entrepreneur.
went to LSE.
Yeah.
He's a very savvy guy who almost
Absolutely.
seems like he's like, hey, what if we take all these like wonderful like blues songs
Yeah.
and take that, but we merge it with sort of like swinging London youth culture.
Absolutely. I think connecting it back to the song, I think there's a deep cynicism in Mick Jagger. He's kind of a cipher. He's kind of a mysterious figure. He gives interviews and such, but you don't really ever feel like you're getting something super deeply real about him.
Yeah.
I think he's very calculated. He's obviously very smart. He's a great performer, a great songwriter. I'm a fan of the work he does. And I also think you're just not really getting a lot of revelatory stuff. I
Yeah.
think his artist versus commerce brain,
There's a tension there.
there is and there isn't. I feel like it's more.
He's actually resolved the
It's
tension.
more resolved than most. I think it's more resolved than most.
He's
I think-
it's not keeping him up at night.
I think Kurt Cobain really wrestled with it, and I think
Yeah.
Mick Jagger didn't wrestle with it as much.
He's like, hey, little slap box. Okay, we're cool. It's so funny because my intention with the Stones is that, like, I really do, the part of me that loves the British music of the mid and late 60s, loves songs like Give Me Shelter. And I actually really like their late 70s output.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
like,
the disco stuff is great.
They aged with their audience. So by like the 70s, like late 70s, they're in New York. New York is grimy and gritty. They released one of the best albums of all time, Some Girls.
Yep.
That's just a great album.
Black and Blue's another one, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they're releasing some of their biggest hits during this period, like Miss You, the old disco classic.
Love that one.
There's another disco song out of that period that I love a lot, Emotional Rescue.
Oh my God, such a great tune. Yeah.
Your savior, steadfast and true. I come to your emotional rescue.
That's straight up disco. That might be like one of the greater disco songs ever
It's a
made.
great song.
Yeah.
And I would say my absolute favorite song out of this period. To me, it really captures that gross, gritty, but super artistic and cool New York of the late 70s is this song. And I know it's a favorite of yours. Let's hear a little snippet of the song, Shattered.
Shadoobie.
Look at me! I'm in tatters! Shattered!
Like I can't not picture him in that like kind of like pink, leotard. There's like a bunch of songs from that era where it's like I think they must have shot them all on the same day because they're all on the same sound
Is
stage.
it the same? To me, what I hear, just because I worked in the 30 Rock building and I know how close he was and is to like Lorne and just Saturday Night Live in general. Like to me, I've been at those like post Saturday Night Live, the post
The after party.
They're so fun, and it's just you feel like you're at the Algonquin Round Table. You know, there's just so many people from so many walks of life. You know, comedians, musicians, Lorne just holding, you know, court, so to speak. And he was there when the cast was young and Lorne was young. It evokes a time.
You're right. It's such a New York feeling. It's so funny. Like the Rolling Stones 70s output definitely makes me think of New York. And one of the great New York bands of the time, even though they're, of course, not from anywhere near New York.
They're not from New York.
But their music actually expresses the grit and you know, grime and glitter of that moment, the disco moment.
I would agree. And also, I feel like they're a band that's absorbing what's in New York at that time. Because like that song could have been in Max's Kansas City.
It could have been a Blondie
CBGB
song.
Yeah, totally. It captures a time.
Yeah.
But I would be remiss if I didn't say that this is a band that I do have a love and hate relationship. Look, they came out with a song that I think is abhorrent. Catchy, but abhorrent. Brown Sugar, not a cool song. I don't feel like playing it right now. But, you know, like, I think I read where the band felt like they were trying to do a song about the horrors of sexual assault and all this stuff during slavery. It didn't come out that way. Mick tries to distance himself from Brown Sugar as early as 1995, which is, to his credit, 31 years ago. He says, I don't know what I was on when I came up with this song. And I don't know if that's him trying to like walk it back or whatever, but like I'm going to try and give him the benefit of the doubt just so that it's not like essentially an essay fantasy song. But they were still performing it regularly for 50 years.
That's
like they literally
possible.
performed it from 1971 when it came out until October 2021. And it's like, really, guys? And so to me, there's always that side of the Stones too that I still grapple with. A lot of catchy tunes. Obviously, these guys were lovers of Black music and Black culture enough to play a major part in disseminating it across the globe. But they also lack, to a certain degree, some of the, I would say, polish and politics of the Beatles. When I hear the Beatles, like I feel like they just come across differently. They come across as the kind of guys who are like, yeah, we really appreciate this music and it's cool to us. There is a little bit more of, I'm going to make up a word here, a little bit more a feel of exploitiness when it comes to the Stones, you know, that I don't get from the Beatles or a lot of other rock groups for that matter. So there is a little bit of a tension. I still get the sense that like at the end of the day, Mick and Keith saw this as their 1960s party boy music in ways that I don't get from other bands. And so that's the tension that I feel. I can already hear you guys charging up your laptops to come at me in the comments,
listen, you're
some of our listeners, but that's how I feel.
You have such a valid opinion and take on this that everything you said is it has its own self-contained integrity, and I'm not going to counter any of it. The only thing I will say, just thinking about I think that there is a risk that artists take, and sometimes the risk pays off, and sometimes it's just too layered and tangled of a topic to like accurately convey what you're trying to convey without lots of footnotes and like interview explanations. And maybe that's a moment where the song needs to be reassessed. Maybe the way you've done it is perfectly put. One last thing I'll say is like the added irony to your point that it is coming on not just the coattails of Black music, but like using, like they're doing more R&B and blues than the Beatles ever did.
Paul disparagingly calls them a blues cover band.
They were originally a blues covers band until this record.
Yeah.
So the idea of sort of blending this tradition, which is not theirs, with these lyrics, which are very speculative, but also super exoticized. And one last point about the exoticization. They are British. So their understanding and absorption of like the story of slavery in American music is like one step removed. It does not excuse them at all, but they are coming at it with like many layers of sort of distance from what the story is like on the ground in America of slavery and Black music. And there's perhaps some like naivete, which he in later years as he grew up and understood what it meant to Americans and to Black Americans may have changed his tune as a result of that.
You might be giving him a little too much credit.
I might be as well.
In the same article, Keith is like, I don't know why we're getting shit for this song.
Well, okay.
So, you know, he's not quite walking back. Look, I'll just say this. I think when it comes to being the purveyors of a certain type of toxic masculinity, their whole catalog, from I Can't Get No Satisfaction through Brown Sugar, through so much stuff, like they're being honest about how they feel. I think just, you know, now that we have a few more voices at the table, we understand that not all this stuff is cool.
No, that's perfectly put. I think one of the ironies about this band ostensibly being rebellious rock and rollers is they don't represent rebellion in the truest sense. They are centered white males with money and privilege.
Like, totally. Like, you can claim this is, I'm being so rebellious. Right. But at the end of the day, like, you're kind of the one group that gets away with a lot of stuff.
When the most powerful, like, group of individuals are saying that they have grievance, and like, it sounds like another category in this day and age. It's like,
I'm not here to criminalize how angsty teen boys feel, because I was one once.
Yeah.
But I also know that some of that stuff that I felt as a male, because that is the group of I have male privilege.
Yeah.
Some of that stuff wasn't okay. Yeah. And I can see that now looking back several decades later. So the Stones are one of those huge groups. They're like blowing up huge in the 60s. But by the time they get to recording Painted Black, there were internal tensions in the group brewing between Keith Richards, Mick Jagger, and Brian Jones. Brian, who had founded the group and was kind of the de facto leader of the group in the early years, found, he was becoming kind of the odd man out as Mick and Keith start basically joining forces and becoming a songwriting duo.
That's right. Brian Jones, legendarily kind of the heart and soul of the band. And that includes the love of the blues and R&B. Like, he was already dissatisfied with the direction the band was going with the song Satisfaction, which he famously, unfortunately, there's no footage of this. If anyone has some out there, I did a deep dive, but he would play during Satisfaction Live, he would play the melody to Popeye the Sailor Man as just a prank. He hated the song. He hated the poppiness. He hated the kind of reaching.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so there's a lot of tension that was brewing already within dissent coming from Brian specifically, I should say, about the success of the band that was starting to happen. And he wasn't a songwriter, so he didn't have a lot of power. Andrew Loog Oldham, the manager of the band, the impresario, famously goes to, at a party, I believe, went to Mick and Keith and said, if you start writing songs, you'll make more money. Because that was sort of new information. Like, publishing was not something, to this day, it's still complicated.
Yeah.
But when they realized that that was an avenue to make even more money, and Mick and Keith, by the way, should be said, were already childhood friends. They already had this bond going back a decade and a half, if not a little longer. So the two of them were already a tightly knit duo, became even more strengthened by their songwriting, prowess and success. And Brian, frankly, was not doing well in terms of his mental health. He was drinking, he was drugging, and there was a lot of tension brewing between the two. And Brian didn't have nearly the power that the duo, the Glimmer Twins of Mick and Keith, were starting to have.
Yeah.
So he became even increasingly sidelined, which made him spin, sort of flywheel into more.
It sped up his
own
spiral.
Demons. And it should be said that Anita Pallenberg, another sort of unsung hero perhaps of this episode, was a huge influence, kind of like Casey Nicole with Perry Farrell and Jane's Addiction. This romantic relationship he was in. A lot of credit should go to Anita Pallenberg for a lot of what makes Brian Jones cool. She introduced him to a lot of sophisticated people and art and, places. So Brian and the two of them became this sort of cohesive entity that didn't help his case within the band. So by the time this song rolls around, we'll be talking about it once we get into the stems, but his contributions apparently include the main melody line that he played on sitar.
Oh, wow.
But once we get to the stems, we'll find out how that was treated in terms of fairness and financial
when we get to the
recompense.
Splits. Yeah, it always comes down to the splits.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that much about Brian Jones coming into this episode. You have taught me a lot. I know that Questlove is actually a big Brian Jones fan just because what he brought to the group. And this guy, he plays so many instruments. He plays the marimba, he plays the sitar, the saxophone, the mellotron. One of the songs he plays the marimba on is Under My Thumb. Let's hear a little bit of Under My Thumb.
He's the melody guy.
He is. He's the Roy Ayers of Under My Thumb.
Exactly. Vibes and marimba are in the same family.
Yeah, that's 100%. Kind of fill a similar space.
Yeah.
That is one of the sounds that makes that song. Absolutely. When you hear that, you know what you're listening to.
Brian had an interest in how can we make this R&B sound a little bit different, a little bit unique, but not too different like Satisfaction, because that's just too poppy. So he had this lane that was very interesting. He was an influencer. He's a tastemaker. There's a sort of sense of, because it should also be said, that Mick and Keith famously at the time were not very sophisticated. They were not very worldly in this moment. They became extremely sophisticated and worldly later.
Totally.
But in this moment, Brian is kind of the cool guy in the band.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, but when we get back, we're going to go inside the song Painted Black, and we're going to discover, was this song influenced by one Turkish song, one surf rock song, or one Supreme song? We'll make that decision when we get back. All right, welcome back to One Song. Let's get into the stems.
So just a little caveat in this episode, this record was recorded on a 4-track. So there's a lot of blend in the stems. There were a lot of bounces. There isn't anything that exists canonically, which is like just all of the isolated parts. There's about a dozen instrument layers, possibly more. But they've been blended by bouncing over time. But those are pretty exciting to listen to. We're going to be hearing a lot of that. And then I'll do occasionally a little AI breakdown, a little DIY, doing my best with EQ and panning to kind of get it a little bit closer. But that's what you'll be hearing on today's episode. Still super exciting way to hear things. And there's a lot that I discovered that I'd never noticed before. Let's just jump into it. Here are the drums, percussion, and some vocals mixed together. Let's listen.
I see a red door and I want it painted black.
So that's Charlie Watts on drums, obviously. We're going to be talking more about that interesting organ part because that was one of the discoveries I had. I mean, it's now that I listen to it, it's like, oh, it's right there. But there's a really cool story behind that. And of course, Mick Jagger on vocals.
I didn't hear an organ on there.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the organ.
Was there an organ on that?
It's almost subliminal, right?
Okay.
It's because it's so rhythmic and it's so like repetitive that it kind of, this ostinato is like, just seems built into the song.
Okay.
But it's a key part of the song's story. We're going to talk about it in just a moment. Here's a little bit of isolation on the drums. As I mentioned before, this was baked into the mix, so I tried to extract it the best I could to just hear Charlie Watts. And it should be noted that he's playing not just the snare drum, but there's also castanets and maracas in there. So we're starting to get some of the exotic
it definitely has some texture
instrumentation
in there. Yeah, it's more than just a snare.
Right. And it evokes, it's starting to also evoke just in this drum layer, some of the exoticness that I alluded to in my long, descriptive sentence about what kind of song this was.
Absolutely.
Some of the Middle Eastern perhaps influence
Absolutely.
or Iberian Peninsula influence of the maracas.
When we were talking about it earlier, we were talking about the fact that I felt like there should be belly dancing going on.
Totally. And it's just in the percussion layer. We're already getting that.
Absolutely.
Wait till we get to the other layers. So this is another moment where you'll hear Mick singing, but listen to the drums in the background. I'd never noticed it. That sounds like, I think it's a tambourine being shaken really quickly.
I could not foresee this thing happening to you. If I look hard enough into the...
It's really interesting to point out, this is indicative, like this is a relic of an era because in 1966, it was normal that you would be bouncing tracks. And just a reminder, go back to our Jimi Hendrix episode, which was recorded in 1967. And
Not our episode about Jimi Hendrix, but these recordings were.
Yeah, we did a 2-part. And it's another example of how once part of the artifact of the stems is reminding us that in an earlier era when we didn't have Pro Tools and digital and infinite track counts for that matter, to say nothing of the 16 tracks and 24 tracks plus that were to come, you had to do some creative mixing techniques. You had to like record on the 4 tracks and then bounce 3 of the tracks onto 1 to free up the other 3, which meant that they were baked in forever and you couldn't change them.
Right.
And the sound quality got reduced the more you did it. What we're hearing is an example of that. This is an old way of recording that just doesn't exist anymore, unless you're doing analog recording, which some people still do. So it's interesting to hear it and be reminded, oh yeah, we didn't used to have infinite track count.
It's the opposite of Steely Dan. I think it's safe to say, every time you hear this song, it always sounds sort of cavernous and grainy like an old recording because it's an old recording.
Exactly. Or go back to our Britney Spears episode where there's literally 100 tracks of vocals.
Yeah.
That was one of the hardest episodes for me to prepare for because I couldn't go through all of them. I had to be selective. But in modern recording, you can have 100 tracks of vocals because it's available and it's free.
Yeah.
Just one more thing to point out about this song as we go through the stems. It's an unusual structure in that it's not really kind of your traditional intro, verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, outro kind of thing. It's really just 2 sections, A and B, that go back and forth 6 times.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like 8 bars of what we're going to call on this show the verse.
The verse.
But it actually has the title in it. Ba, 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 ba. Something painted black.
Yeah.
Or the word black is at the end.
Totally.
But the lyrics change all 6 times.
It's a little more akin to a song like Lil Wayne's A Milli, where the chorus is sort of laced throughout instead of stopping the verse and going to a chorus.
That's right. So you could call it we're going to call it the verse for the purposes of the song. That's the I See a Red Door.
Yeah.
But then we switch to a second section, a different 8 bars musically, which we'll call the chorus. I'm going to just call attention to one more thing. We've been talking about the exotic layers of the song and the conscious effort to kind of bring in things beyond the blues, to break out of this like just R&B blues tradition they'd started with.
Yeah.
And another sort of allusion, I think, this is something I hear, is I hear an allusion to Ravel, to Bolero in this section in particular. So listen for something similar to that rhythmic motif that happens towards the end of the song. Here's just a moment. This is Ravel's Bolero from 1928, which is just 38 years before this song. So it's not like an old classical tune. It's something that might have been familiar recently to them.
It's one of those songs that I feel like everybody's heard, but you don't always know who created it and what the name of it is.
Exactly. So now that you've heard Ravel, 1938 Bolero, I think that Charlie Watts and company are doing a bit of an allusion to that when we get to this section towards the end. I think they're just having fun with that, throwing it in there.
So I read that bassist Bill Wyman did something really experimental on this song. He gets down on the floor and he starts beating the Hammond organ pedals with his fists.
Exactly.
And I mean, like, I don't know what causes a person to do that. Maybe he's being creative. Maybe he was high. Maybe he's a combination of both. But Luxury, can we hear the organ?
And I'll give that to you in context, right?
That's fun. I kind of want to like slow that down Michael Jackson, Quincy Jones style and see if there's like a fun song there.
And I'll play it in context because, again, this was the number one thing I hadn't noticed until I got into studying the stems.
I see a red door and I want it painted black. No color.
Will you humor me? Is there a way to play that isolated organ slow? Like, can you change the BPM on it?
Sure.
Is there a way to slow it down to like 120?
This is straight up. That's straight up rock steady.
Love that.
That's straight up rock steady now.
Yeah, I can totally see rock steady too. There's something fun there. But don't do it. You might get a letter from Alan Klein. Look up the verb. Real quick, I also want to say that I find that isolated organ interesting because, like, this song is talking about a guy who's feeling down.
Yeah.
You know, like he's sad. And yet the tempo is furiously fast.
Right. So that part had them rollicking with laughter because it evoked to all of them sort of a like bar mitzvah kind of vibe. As Mick Jagger put it, if you'd been at the session, it was like one big joke. We put Bill on piano and he plays this funny Beijing, 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 Beijing. So to them, it was really funny. And they were like, wait a second, it's funny, but it actually kind of works too. Mm-hmm. So he tries to play that on the organ with his feet because it's the foot pedals that you're hearing. It's the bass of the organ. But the pedals were sticking. So he had to get down on the ground on his stomach and actually play them by pounding his fists on the foot pedals to get that sound. And that's what we're hearing. That's Bill Wyman, the bass player, playing the organ with his fists on the ground. And the same part is also played on the piano, we think by Jack Nietzsche, and you'll hear the actual part really clearly here, the very bar mitzvah-y sounding thing. It's almost like a polka.
It does sound like Hava Nagila.
Yeah. It sounds like Hava Nagila or a polka, or maybe it's even like ska. It's another kind of like Jamaican kind of thing.
That weird connection.
Exactly.
The guitars to me make this song, and you know, I'm such a big bass guy, but like I barely even heard those bass parts before today. So can you let us know what the guitars are doing on this song?
You're about to hear 5 or 6 instruments played by Keith Richards and Brian Jones. Definitely an electric guitar, acoustic guitar, and you'll even hear a sitar in there.
There's a sitar in there.
There's a sitar in there.
I had questions if there was a sitar in here.
Yeah.
Let's hear it, and I got something to say. It's so interesting. You know, I never heard those sitars before. It felt like a song that needed sitars.
Okay.
It had a sitar appeal, but I
Interesting.
don't think that I actually heard the
Yeah.
sitars playing. I mainly heard the guitars.
Well, let's see if we can hear it even more explicitly. Again, I'm trying to break down within this baked track.
Yeah.
So it'll be a little bit washy sounding.
Sure.
But here's a little bit of my DIY guitar, and then I'll add the sitar in. You can definitely hear the acoustic in there. And I'll add the sitar now. It's that most trebly thing on top.
Yeah. Now I hear it now.
You hear it now, yeah.
Absolutely. Now I do feel like we're on that, that jaunt over to India with George Harrison and,
Yeah.
and the guys.
Well, I'm
yeah.
glad you brought up George Harrison. Let's talk a little bit about this sitar part.
Mhm.
The sitar as an instrument, just briefly, it's 18 to 21 strings, only 6 or 7 of which play the melody like a guitar would, but the rest are just sympathetic strings that add to that droney quality that you hear. That gives it sort of an ethereal, to
yeah.
our ears at least in the West.
A mystic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It has a lot of associations with mysticness, of course, because of its other
Spirituality.
uses,
Yeah.
right?
There's nothing wrong with that.
Because of Ravi Shankar and all the reasons we would have been hearing that instrument in the West to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So Brian Jones, who is an unsung hero of this episode,
Very
as we've
much.
been discussing, apparently heard, by his own telling, he was a big Beatles fan, and he definitely heard it in this song from the Beatles in 1965, and it made a big impression on him. This is Norwegian Wood from Rubber Soul.
I love Norwegian Wood. It's such a wonderful, cool Beatles song
Yeah.
off of Rubber Soul. And can I just also say that I'm realizing now, to a certain extent, the sitar sounds like an Indian ukulele. Like it's got like that pluckiness, and
Yeah.
it just feels
Very
like,
trebly, yeah.
yeah.
hmm
Yes, it's the register that it can reach is way up there.
It has a sustained quality to it. So those notes really, they ring out because you're hearing the sympathetic strings ringing throughout the whole thing.
Yeah.
So that's part of the quality that they bring to it that is unique, or at least certainly wasn't in rock and roll at the time until George Harrison brings it into rock and roll with
Yeah.
Norwegian Wood. And now we sort of take for granted adding influences outside of like pop music and rock sounds. This was kind of a new idea at the time. And Brian Jones caught into it tremendously. He loved it.
Can I just admit, I just love instruments with texture. I think that's why I like the Hammonds. That's why I like the 808 bass sound that hip hop uses. Like I like it when when a note can sustain, but
Yeah.
then also feel like it's like got a texture to it.
Right.
That's probably the best way I could put it.
It's very important just to point out that in this moment, 1965 into 1966, that is the texture changes
Yeah.
are being added to this rock and roll and to this R&B based music, both by the Beatles and the Stones, but also the Kinks are doing it, the Yardbirds. There's other bands that are looking
Yeah.
to just have new, interesting sounds. And of course, Hendrix is about to start doing it too. One more thing I want to point out is that initial strum.
Mhm.
I'll play it for you, and then I'll tell you some of my thoughts about where it might have come from. So those strums,
Yeah.
1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 is on the end of 4, I think, into the next note. Those strums to me are very evocative of some surf rock stuff,
I could totally see that.
right?
I was going to say
yeah.
like old Western movies.
Yeah, it has that
It's weird that
quality
it's
too.
got Eastern influences and old Western / surf movie in it as well.
Absolutely. And there is a spaghetti Western into surf rock
Yes.
connection as well. Dick Dale.
Yes.
We'll be talking about him in just a moment. But that chord strum in particular reminds me of this song. This is Pipeline by the Shantays from 1963, which was a hit in the UK. Surf rock from the OC.
Holy smokes. The whole song, though. Hold on. Think about this tempo.
Yeah.
That
bass line, That's what Bill Wyman is doing something very similar.
Yes. No, I think this, I totally agree. I had
Yeah.
never thought of this song, which I've heard before.
Yeah.
Can I just say, surf rock is maddening because you'll go up to the record store and you'll be like, hey, do you have that song that goes like no lyrics? That instrumental,
That's right.
instrumental
Yeah,
compilation.
they're all instrumentals. All the Ventures, all those bands, exactly.
That one commercial for the instrumental compilation saved my life because I was like, oh, these are all the songs that don't have words. Now I can finally know who sings what.
I love
Yes,
surf
this-
rock. Yeah.
What's the surf rock song
So
again?
that's Pipeline by the Shantays. The Ventures did it famously a few years later, but this version was actually pretty big hit in the
And
UK.
it sounds way more like Painted Black. Look, we're not saying anybody copied anybody, but
No, but-
that sounds way more like Painted Black than I would have ever connected if you hadn't played them back to back.
They feel like very likely influences,
Yes.
along with Norwegian Wood, along with Bolero. And by the way, this song has moments and little bits and pieces of some of the bits and pieces of those songs, but sounds nothing like it holistically as a song, obviously.
No, that's really cool. Great
Yeah.
connection.
Nice one.
We were talking earlier about the structure of the song, and I
Right.
think the structure of the song is really interesting because
Yeah.
it's one of those weird songs where it's sort of like you've got this one part and you've got another part, and it just kind of goes back and forth the whole song.
That's right.
And I'm going to point out the first song that comes to mind that's sort of like that for me
Mm-hmm.
is Music Sounds Better With You by Stardust. It kind
Okay.
of does one thing and then it goes to another thing and then it goes back and forth and back and forth. This is another song that just goes back and forth between two things.
That's right.
Let's talk about that other thing that it does, which is when it kind of goes, correct me if I'm wrong, does it kind of go major? Like I feel like after introducing us to the East as these Western listeners, then it kind of goes to more of a traditional da 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 da.
Yeah, the chord changes in this other section go 1, 7, 3, 7, and then it changes 1, 7, 3, 7, 4, 5.
Yeah.
I didn't quite sing it right, but the chord changes in this section give us a nice contrast to loop us back to that A section.
Yeah.
again. And
And
it's
for me-
satisfying every time.
And correct me if I'm wrong, it is less Eastern sounding and it is more just traditional sort of like drivey rock music.
It connects more to the blues by those chord
Yes.
changes, I would say, because we get that 4, 5, the subdominant, back to the dominant, back to the 1.
Can we hear a little bit of it?
Let's do it. Here it is in the guitar part. And this time it's a little different. 1, 7, 3, 7, 4, 5. Now we got to go back to the 1.
And then we're back into the tension. It's
back
like
to
the
the
tension and the
tension, yeah.
release and the
Right.
tension and the release.
Yeah.
Love it.
It's great songwriting, and these guys are learning how to write songs in this moment. This is the first record where it's all original compositions and not a hodgepodge of covers, a handful of originals. This is all original on Aftermath.
But Jones is bringing what he brings to the song.
He's bringing what he brings to the song, and is he in the songwriting credits? We'll find out at the very end.
We'll talk about the splits. So this song has a very mystic old world feel to it. Mick himself described Painted Black as a Turkish influenced song, but some people have gone so far as to say it was influenced by one specific Turkish song by Erkin Koray from 1966. Check this out. Let that ride, let that ride. What the fuck? I don't know, man.
Let's break this down. This
I
show
wish
is
I
called,
had some tea.
this is one
I
song.
wish I had some tea so I
This
could
is
sip
one
it.
song, and you got Diallo and Luxury. So we're going to talk about this.
Woo.
We're going to break it down, and we're going to talk about whether it's an interpolation or if it's an evocation combination.
Okay.
Because in my humble opinion, I think it might be the latter. But let's talk
You think
about
it's
it.
okay? Who is Erkin Koray? His name sounds like an anagram. It sounds like somebody who's like...
This is Turkish Anatolian rock from,
Uh-huh.
we think, 1966. Now, here's the thing. On Discogs, this record shows up as being first released in 1966, which is the same year as Painted Black.
Uh-huh.
So it might be fair to say that we can never know for certain which record was released first and might have heard the other one first.
Right. I will say, it reminds me of Rod Stewart and that
Yeah.
song that he might have picked up in South America.
Right.
The laws were a lot different back then.
Sure.
I do feel like,
You could get away with,
I feel like these British rockers, they were traveling.
Yeah.
They were
no one's ever
touring.
going to hear this song.
They're
I'm
like,
hearing.
yeah, you're never gonna.
Right.
There's never gonna be a website, whatever the fuck that is, that's gonna compile all these things, and people are gonna be able to play them and be
Right.
like, oh shit.
Fair point. But let me point something out to you. Okay, first of all, we're going to break this down. Like, why does it sound familiar? Well,
Yeah.
some of the instrumentation, some of the tempo, some of the
Yeah.
rhythm. And then what about those notes?
Those notes.
I'm going to play on my very not sitar sounding VST plugin of a
What does the
sitar.
sitar sound like on there?
Stop. Wait, so
Sounds like we got a sitar in the room. Hey man, burn that incense, brother. Whew. I'm high off the Nakchamba. All right. It sounds just like a sitar.
it's a sitar in.
Ravi Robin.
It's like, what do they call, like, Rhino, Republican in name only? It's Sino. Sitar in name only.
A sino.
There are actually only 4 notes that are the same,
Uh-huh.
which is 4 notes that are the same. You're going to find millions of times across music. It's not the same rhythm. And importantly, it's not the same key. Now, let's talk for a second about the key, because that's a big part of what gives Paint It Black its Eastern flair.
character.
Its
Yeah.
character,
Yeah.
right. This is in diatonic scales. This is minor or Aeolian.
Oof. Twisted scale.
Paint It Black, however, is a little different. There are 2 notes that are different. There's a flatted 6th and a raised or sharp 7. I'll play it for you, and you'll hear the difference, I think, right away at the top of the scale. So far the same. So far the same. This note's a little different. So the big change happens because we actually have a minor third at the end of that scale. Usually our diatonic scales are all half steps and whole steps.
Yeah.
This one skips 3 half steps at the end. I'll play it again.
You can't. It makes your face move.
It
Why
makes
does
your
that make your face
it's
move
like
every
it's
time?
like eating a lemon,
And
but it feels so good.
so painful.
It feels so good. It's harmonic minor. It's called harmonic minor because once you get to that 7th, you really want to get back to the 1. It's begging you to go to the 1. Usually in the blues and in regular minor 7th, it's a flat 7th, which sounds like. And the song we just played, the Turkish rock song,
Yeah.
is using that flat 7th. And that's a big deal because Paint It Black is. That's the note that we're like, oh, this is slightly outside of the canon of pop.
Yes,
This
exactly.
is outside of the canon of blues and R&B.
This really makes me want to go find Erkin Koray, which he might have some other hits, man. I mean,
might.
like
Some good stuff.
that was some good stuff.
But listen, I will say this. Here's a song that I think is a little more similar.
Yeah.
From 1965. So this one definitely came before Paint It Black. This is the Supremes, My World Is Empty Without You, Babe.
My world is empty without you, babe.
Let's compare that just because our ears have forgotten about it to Paint It Black, potentially.
Have they? Have we?
I see a rector and I want it into black.
And I'll just make the comparison explicit again. So
Bring out that sitar, my man.
bring out that sitar. Guys, I'm not really sitting here holding a sitar. I know it sounds like it. Again, a key part of that is that major 7th. That makes it harmonic minor. But anyway, here is My World Is Empty Without You, Babe. Again, same first 4 notes from 1965. My world is empty without you, babe. How many notes are the same?
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
I
9,
need
10,
a red door and my
Want
world
to-
is empty without. That's 7 notes, isn't it? Okay, so this one has 7 notes that are the same.
This one starts off like the Stones, but it doesn't continue along that path quite like my man Erkin Koray.
It doesn't have the similarities of tempo and instrumentation, and even the fact of the vocal line being sung to the instrument part doubling it isn't happening in the Supremes, but the notes are actually kind of more similar.
I agree.
the Supremes?
It's almost like a postmodern mashup of like everything that Keith and Mick were probably into at the time, which you can imagine where the Supremes,
absolutely.
this random song they heard from a Turkish artist, like it's a lot of things all at once. Now we come to the vocals, and I want to talk to you about the lyrics because to me, I'd always associated this song with the Vietnam War. That was pretty much my interpretation. I was like, this is a song that's about, guys on helicopters flying over jungles.
Right.
And now that I hear it and I've looked at the lyrics, it seems to be quite clearly about a guy who's attending the funeral of the woman that he loved. I didn't know that the Anglican Church painted their doors red. And so he sees that door and he wants to paint it black, and he sees, girls in the street, but he has no sex drive today because he wants to paint their summer dresses black. I think that's interesting because it reminds me of the Doors song, People Are Strange, where it's like, people are strange when you're strangers, streets are uneven when you're alone. It's just this idea that like you can just be in this mood and in this funk, and it just paints everything.
Yeah.
this really dark color. And I
Well,
feel like,
And in pop music, like, although there's R&B and blues influences, to say the least, that's understating it in Rolling Stones music. And those are traditions that have darkness in their lyrics. Pop music and the Beatles weren't singing about this stuff. The Kinks were starting to, the Beatles were a little bit later, would get into it.
Yeah.
But in 65, 66, the
it's like
Stones,
some happy time.
Yeah, I mean,
There's a lot of happy songs at that time.
but the Stones were angst-ridden. They were like this is sort of a goth moment for them, and there's like a darkness to them. There's part of why the Beatles-Stones divide, which is a little bit, overly maybe stated as like us versus them. Like,
sure,
they had more similarities than differences, all this to say. There is more darkness in their music, and this is maybe the prime example of how this sort of personal expression of angst is newly in pop music at the time.
Let's hear a little bit of Mick's isolated vocals.
I see a line of cars and they're all painted black, with flowers and my love both never to come back.
You can almost imagine, a 20-year-old, singing these lyrics into a microphone, which is what I always try to do. We always try to like take away
When you
like the
strip the
professional
music away.
shine of it and just hear what is essentially one or two people just saying something.
Yeah, the
into a mic.
vulnerability of actually stepping up to the microphone and being a human singing the song.
Which we do on this podcast every episode.
So vulnerable.
One day people will isolate our vocals and they'll be like, not bad.
I think they've heard enough of us, frankly. Let's face it. And again, just to point out that melody line, same as the sitar, with the raised seventh, right? The sharp seven. That one single half step in the scale is really why we're evoking not just the Middle Eastern, the Turkish, but it's also like the Arabic, the flamenco.
Yeah.
It also connects to like neoclassical metal. Like when you hear like Yngwie Malmsteen or even Randy Rhoads, like some of the stuff they were doing was just their scale selection often included that one single note. From song to song it varies, but that's what makes it sound. That's what makes some metal sound Eastern or classical or just exotic in general. So it's interesting just to really call attention to that one half step difference in the scale that's being used can evoke so much globally and historically.
Can you play that part where he talks about the girls going by summer clothes?
I see the girls walk by dressed in their summer clothes. I have to turn my head until my darkness goes.
Who's harmonizing with him there?
So the credits have Keith Richard as being a harmony vocal. I don't think it's there. That sounds like Mick to me, but it might be
You
Keith.
think it's double mix?
I think it's a double track, but I can't be sure. To my ear, that sounds like Mick doing the harmony, but it might be Keith. We definitely know for the sake of why his name is listed in the liner notes as a harmony vocal. Towards the end, all the humming feels like maybe, I think that's certainly going to involve other members of the band who are maybe more note challenged with, which Keith famously has a wonderful singing voice, but he's no Mick, let's put it that way, in terms of hitting the notes melodically speaking.
You mentioned the hums. Let's hear the hums because there's a lot going on there.
That's right. So in the sixth repeat, we replace same melody, but now it's just replaced with humming for the last minute of the song.
Right. And it kind of echoes what the guitar was doing.
It's the same melody line.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
They almost sound ironic. They almost
I
sound like
think
they're
so, too.
imitating the Rolling Stones.
I think so too. I hear them imitating the sitar because the shape of the notes on the sitar, it's a little bit more, we're getting in between the notes. It's a little more microtonal, which is part of why it sounds so unique and exciting sounding. And they're doing it too with they're kind of wobbling around the notes, giving it a little space. It's not directly hitting each pitch, specifically and going to the next pitch. They're going in between the notes. But I hear a little bit of a smirk too, a little bit of, if it's not quite sarcasm, it's that same humorous mindset of the beat, jeeping, jing-ping, jing. This whole session is joyful and a little bit funny.
Yeah.
And it's got that kind of polka vibe and it's double time. It's kind of like Hava Nagila, right? There's a little bit of that going on with this.
Yeah, there's a playfulness. All right, Luxury, now that we've heard the song, tell us how the splits break down.
All right. Well, according to the public records, this song is 50-50 the Glimmer Twins. That's right. 50% Mick, 50% Keith, 0% anybody else. And part of why this is important is because in this moment...
And Bill Wyman played two different instruments.
100%. And as we alluded to earlier in the episode, this is a moment of shifting of power within the group, right? But it's not just Mick and Keith versus Brian. It's a little bit Mick and Keith versus everybody. Because prior to this moment on earlier records, they would either be doing covers, or you
Mhm.
may notice, fans of the band know this, that sometimes you'll see Nonker Felge as the songwriting credit,
Yeah.
which was a pseudonym for the entire band, basically, for them to avoid having to track down either for public domain stuff or for stuff that was questionably of
It's like
origin.
their way of hiding
It was a little bit their
Yeah.
way of hiding that they were sort of taking credit for somebody else's work, or for public domain work that had no known authorship.
Yeah.
But that Nonker Felge entity was a way that everyone got a little bit of the publishing royalty. So Bill Wyman, the bass player, famously says that, look, Paint It Black was a collective effort and it should have been credited to Nonker Felge,
Yeah.
but they stopped using that and they started going, you know what, it's just the two of us. And because they had their manager, Andrew Luke Oldham, on their side, they were able to get away with basically taking credit, not
Yeah.
unlike the Lennon-McCartney situation.
I was going to say it's a little bit like Macklin
Right.
when you would see that in some credits. But, oh, man, I feel bad for the other guys in the group.
Yeah, it probably would have been more fair to cut in definitely Bill Wyman based
Yeah.
on the stories we were just
Totally.
telling. It seems as though the sitar melody may have come from Brian Jones himself.
Yeah.
Not just the sitar choice, but also the melody itself.
Mhm.
And the other band members were used to kind of being more collective. But in this moment, the collective is starting to become a duo.
There you go.
All right, so Diallo, what do you think the legacy of Paint It Black and the Rolling Stones is?
For me, there's something to be said about just the Stones' longevity. This is one
Yeah.
of those songs that has managed to stay around. You know, I don't know that our kids will necessarily, be as exposed to it as much as the boomers start to exit. But I definitely think that this is one of those songs that, whether you love the band or hate the band, you can appreciate why the song is so catchy and why it's managed to stick around. I've said for a while, if you go to see the Rolling Stones tonight, because I'm sure they're playing somewhere tonight, you are kind of going to see the songs, but also you're kind of going to see Mick. I mean, can I also just say some kind words about Mick? I think that to a certain extent, he is still the definition of a rock star. They had a song come out just 10 years ago, Moves Like Jagger. I think it's understood that he doesn't play instruments, but he gets out there and he does the rooster
It's the
and
moves.
he points at people.
He's got the moves.
And, he's managed to stay kind of looking like a cool version, older version of his old self.
Yeah.
To me, the Stones in this song, they speak to creating something that has legs. It speaks to longevity and sort of what we expect from our rock musicians and performers.
Absolutely. And to a certain degree, it doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense that these guys are still alive,
I know.
knowing all the debauchery that they've been through.
I think it's just it's genetics.
Yeah.
I think that some people can do everything right and unfortunately die in their 60s. And then some people like Keith, I get the sense he's going to be around for a very long time.
And unfortunately, Brian Jones didn't make it that long. He passed away just 2 years after the song came out. It's
Insane.
still an unsolved crime. He was found dead in his swimming pool. We don't really know what happened to Brian Jones. We know
They
he was
just walked in and he was in the pool.
well. He was found dead in his pool. There have been lots of investigations and documentaries. There's some theory that the bricklayer may have killed him because he didn't pay him, like at his home.
Oh, wow.
And who
Well,
knows?
an autopsy would say it. The bricklayer killed him, though, right?
Why would an autopsy know that? I mean, you're presuming that a brick was found.
I assumed he hit him with a brick.
If there was a brick in the autopsy, that may be a clue, which maybe no one's thought to look into until this
I
moment.
just cracked the case, guys. This has officially become a true crime podcast.
And of course, it's an absolute tragedy. Brian Jones, if not the creative genius behind the entirety of the band's even existing,
Yeah.
certainly a huge creative force through this era in this song. And just his personal demons got to him. And it didn't help that he was iced out of the band.
Yeah.
That spiral that was created may have contributed to, unfortunately, his demise.
That said, I will say it was a little funny on, the British legal system is so weird. They said that he death by misadventure.
Such a British sounding death.
I know, that's so.
It's like a Monty Python death.
It's like the misadventures of Sheriff Lobo.
Misadventure, right.
The misadventures of.
It's like a whitewashing of murder. Misadventure.
Somehow they found a way to find some comedy in it.
But Brian Jones didn't make it, and he's also, in fact, the first member of the quote-unquote 27 Club, which would later,
wow.
in the next 2 years, Hendrix would go, Jim Morrison would go,
Yeah.
Janis Joplin, and then later on Kurt Cobain and Amy Winehouse,
Yeah.
all at 27, way too young. But the rest of the band is still kicking,
Still
alive and
kicking.
kicking and on tour.
Yeah.
And to me, when I think about that as a musician myself, it's like there's a version of your goals as a musician. There's a version of yourself that's like, gosh, I hope I'm still making music as long as the Rolling Stones are, because that seems like the best case scenario, right? That you're still making music and touring and doing
And people
well
love it.
into your 80s.
Yes.
But the flip side of that, as we talk about this song,
Mhm.
Paint It Black, and we think about the legacy of this band, I'm struck by how it's kind of a deal with the devil to be playing the same song for 60 years. There's something
You think that'll get
about
monotonous.
There's something about that I can't really fathom. In my own version of like performing and playing music,
Yeah.
I've played dozens and dozens of shows, like maybe 100 performances. And I'm tired of my own songs, right? You get a little bit, it's hard to find something in it that you every night are looking forward to like re-examining or reliving. So I don't know how they do it. That feels like, though, the flip side of this fame and fortune is like, well, you're up there on stage. Are you going through the motions? Or can you really get back to that emotion that led you to write the song?
I think they're
in
going a little through the
1965?
motions. But I'll say I've seen the Stones perform live, maybe around like 2001, and even that's 25 years ago.
Mhm.
I remember that the arrangements
Yeah.
were very watered down, like that sort of like furious pace, like you want for like a Painted Black. It's like it was a lot slower.
They slowed it down, the tempo.
Yeah, it was a lot slower. It felt a little more like smooth,
Not hitting all the
jazzy.
high notes.
It felt like smooth jazz
Yeah.
version of Painted Black. I remember that specifically. So it's hard to like give people like the rowdy, raunchy show that
When
you
you're
might
80,
have done
yeah.
at the Hippodrome in London,
Yeah.
a couple of decades ago. But like,
More like the hip replacement drum, am I right? These poor guys, like, I don't have a lot of empathy for the conundrum, because obviously the flip side of it is like, it's fame and fortune and everything.
Yeah.
But like, that's why I say deal with the devil, because on paper, fame and fortune isn't everything in life. There's also like
Right.
what you spend your time doing. Look, I mean, this is the smallest violin in the world playing for the Rolling Stones, having to perform Painted Black for 60 years.
yeah,
But I just find that to be really intriguing. Like, what do you do with your brain? We had Sean Stockman on the show a few weeks ago.
about Boyz II Men.
And he was talking about how sometimes they're singing, End of the Road, and he's thinking about the hamburger he's going to get from room service when he gets back after the show. So there's a little bit of that, I think, going on here.
You're probably right. Okay, Luxury, it's time for one more song. This is the segment where we share a deep cut or a hidden gem with you, the One Song Nation, and with each other. Luxury, why don't you go first?
All right, Dale. So my one more song, one of my favorite bands of all time. We did allude to this singer on another episode. We hopefully someday will do an episode on them.
Mm-hmm.
But this is Liz Fraser from Cocteau Twins.
Oh, nice.
It's Lorelei from the Treasure album, one of my favorite albums in their catalog. I get chills with every syllable, every phoneme from this woman's, from her voice, from her heart, from her chest, an ethereal quality. And this record is particularly interesting because they use, I think it's a different drum machine than the other one, so it's got
Yeah.
a little more of an industrial sound to it. So it's Treasure is like their most industrial sounding record, but that's just in the drum machine. The rest of it is ethereal vocals from heaven,
We are big
the
Cocteau-
voice of God.
Absolutely. We're big Cocteau Twins fans here. at the show.
Absolutely. What about you, Diallo? What is your one more song this week?
My one more song, in keeping with talking about the Stones and Shattered and grimy New
And
York.
Shadoobie.
Here's another one that I really like a lot. This is I always want to call them the Conch, but they were actually just Conch. And this is a song called Love Attack.
I look at you, and I know you're mine. And I run my finger through your.
You know, it's got that really drivey bass line.
Perfect bass line.
You
yeah.
can just sort of, you're like, you're in the back of a cab. You're south of Soho. You don't know what's going to happen tonight, but like the night is young. As always, if you have an idea for one more song, you can find us on Instagram and TikTok and DM us. You can find me on Instagram at Diallo, Diallo, and on TikTok at Diallo Riddle.
And you can find me on Instagram at LUXXURY and on TikTok at LuxuryXX.
And you can follow our podcast on Instagram and TikTok at One Song Podcast for exclusive content. You can also watch full episodes of One Song on YouTube. Just search for One Song Podcast. We'd love it if you'd like and subscribe.
Also, be sure to check out the One Song Spotify playlist for all the songs we discuss in our episodes. You can find the link in our episode description.
And if you've made it this far, welcome. You're officially part of the One Song Nation.
Oh, say, can you see?
Show us some love, give us 5 stars, and leave us a review. And also send this episode to a fellow music fan. It really helps keep this show thriving. Luxury, help me in this episode.
I'm producer, DJ, songwriter, musicologist, and KCRW DJ every Friday night from 10 p.m. till midnight, Luxury.
And I'm actor, writer, director, and sometimes DJ, Diallo Riddle.
And this is One Song. We'll see you next time. Oh, say, can you see?
This episode is produced by Melissa Duenas. Our video editor is Casey Simonson. Mixing by Michael Hartman and engineering by Eric the Man Hicks. This show is executive produced by Kevin Hart Mike Stein, Brian Smiley, and Eric Weil.